Welcome to Good Goodbyes, the Funeral Facts podcast. We are really glad you found us. In this podcast, me, Simon, a funeral director,
And me, Tina, I'm an independent celebrant.
are going to discuss all things funeral in an informal space to demystify what happens when we say goodbye.
Based on your questions and queries, Si and myself are two industry professionals that are going to chat through the hows, whats, and wherefores. We actively work in the funeral industry in Devon in the UK. So, we hope you enjoy the episode ahead. Welcome to Good Goodbyes. Hello, this is Tina, the independent celebrant. Welcome to Good Goodbyes.
Hi, everybody. Simon, the funeral director, here today. And today we're going to talk about a bit of a step-by-step guide and a bit of a walkthrough of what happens. What's the first thing you do and what happens then? What's the process? Because it's pretty standard. There are things that happen for everybody, but the little nuances might catch you out. And coming from the profession, sometimes it's nice to be able to answer those so people aren't quite so daunted by the next steps.
So when do you first get involved then after a death? So what happens?
So for us, that first call, as we call it, and that first point of contact from a family is usually right after death. So as soon as someone has passed away, whoever's caring for that person, be it a doctor, be it a hospice nurse, someone like that, will advise the family, right, you now need to go and phone the funeral director, whichever funeral director you've chosen. And that can be at any time of day or night. We are here 24/7. Our phones are always on, and our team are always available. You'd be amazed how many people have rung me at 9 o'clock in the morning saying, "Dad died last night, but I didn't want to ring you till office hours."
Oh.
We don't have office hours. We've always got a team on and available. So that first call comes in, and the first thing we're going to check is that the death has been verified. Now, there's lots of words you're going to hear throughout that process, and there's difference between verified and certified, and a death certificate and a medical certificate for death. And this, hopefully, as we talk about it in this episode, is going to explain those differences. So verified means that a qualified professional has verified that death has occurred. So they've done all the checks for vital signs. And as a nurse, I'm sure you've done those, Tina.
I have done them, yeah. You have to qualify, do an additional qualification in the verification of death, actually, as a nurse. And it's because sometimes when people are dying, please forgive me for saying it like this, but they have a few false moments when you think, oh, they've gone. And then they have another breath and you think, oh, they haven't gone, because the gaps between their breaths can become longer and longer. And so sometimes the family are wondering, is that the final breath? And so part of the verification is to just make sure everyone in the room absolutely understands this person is no longer living and they have died. And you listen to the breaths for a certain amount of time. For absence of breaths, listen for absence of heartbeat. You would look at pupils, stuff like that. You'd look at the physical part of the person to clarify for you that they are now, no longer living. So that's what the verification is, and it's just an important moment. And sometimes families have been sitting around, and it's the moment in which I've said, yes, they've died after my verification, that they become upset and realize that that's the end point for them.
Is it? Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, that verification is vital. As a funeral director, I am not qualified to do that. It doesn't mean that when I go out to the house, I'm not making absolutely sure. And I'm sure we'll have an episode on funny moments and things that we didn't expect to find necessarily, because one of mine was a lady sat up reading a book.
Mm.
But we will come around to that at another time, and I'll leave you down with that one because it is a great story. It really is.
Well, I'll log that in my mind to ask you at a later date then.
Yeah, make a note, make a note.
Yeah.
So yeah, verification, really, really important. First step, and until such time as death has been verified, I can't come out. We can't come out to the home, to the hospice, to the hospital, whatever it might be. If this is an expected death, at that point, we will come out. It's only when it's not expected. So when the death it has been sudden, then or unexpected. So if you find someone that's passed away, obviously the first call there is not me. It's the police. It's an ambulance, and they're going to come out. They're going to question as to whether this was expected or not. And the difference there is that the coroner's officers will be called rather than the funeral director, and we can talk about the coroner's sort of procedure as well as we go on through this, because it's a little bit further down the line, but it just means that first moment of who's getting called. If this is expected, you call your funeral director, they answer at whatever time it might be, they come out and they're going to bring your loved one into their care, and hopefully that's going to be somewhere really local to you. And obviously your local independent funeral director is going to make sure of that. They're going to be looking after them, and they're going to tell you where that is, and that's another really important thing, because it puts your mind at rest. You're going to want to know where your dad's gone or your mum's gone, and that's kind of what we do. Nobody wants to have a big in-depth conversation about funerals at 2 o'clock in the morning, so it's quite a brief visit. You kind of pop in, have a little chat, make sure there's any immediate questions, because you don't want to be leaving you with questions on the tip of your tongue and kind of wondering if it could be a really quick answer.
Yeah, and I've been the other side of that. So I've been in the home as a nurse when funeral directors have arrived, and they are very compassionate. I just want to reassure people, especially somebody like Si and his team. So I've been in a home when the lady was letting her husband be taken by the funeral director team, and she said, "Oh no, he's really cold." And the funeral director said, "Shall I put a blanket around him?" And she gave him a blanket, and it was just absolutely the right thing to have happened. So there's a lot of compassion and a lot of kindness in those moments. And it's important to say that, I think, because it's not a cold clinical situation.
No, and obviously there's things that we have to do. So one of our first jobs is I'll put an ID bracelet on the person, and that's for everyone's sake, because that ID tracking is vitally important. Everyone hears the myths and the rumors of the wrong body in the wrong coffin or whatever it might be, and this is why it's so early in our procedure that we make sure that happens, so these mistakes cannot happen, because you know your loved one to look at. I do not. My colleagues do not. The next person that comes in the next day when the doctor's coming in to certify may not. So that ID is really important, and as much as it looks a little bit clinical, perhaps, I hope people understand how important it is and what it's there to do. So then, we'll take your loved one into our care. We'll make the bed. We'll tidy up the room, because you don't want to walk back into that bedroom and it be a mess, and you have to think that that's your first job to do. Or we want to leave it nicely, and leave a better sort of image for you. We'll take your loved one into care, into our chapel of rest. We'll carry out what's called first offices, and that's to make sure that the person is clean, they're dignified, they're covered, because again, you're going to want to perhaps come and visit our chapel of rest further down the line, and we want to give you the best opportunity for that to be the most positive experience. So doing these things early, sooner is always better. From the moment you die to the moment of the funeral, the way that the body reacts and Mother Nature treats us, it's not getting better. Sooner is always better.
And it's interesting what you say about first offices, because as a nurse you would always perform last offices in a hospital setting, not so much in someone's home, but definitely in a hospital. You know, one of your last kind acts for a person would be to do that, you know, washing and making look presentable, and that's kind of what nurses do a lot, and care homes. So that's kind of interesting, isn't it? But also some religions and some families want to do that. And I've been at home with a lady who said, "Can I just brush his hair and can just wash his face before he goes?" And I said, of course you can. So, you know, these things are just all about continuing this feeling of caring for the person's body, even though the spirit or the rest of them, whatever way you look at it, is no longer, there.
Absolutely, and that's a really important point actually about other religions, because there are religions that do very much take this on hands-on, and the funeral director should absolutely facilitate that and allow that to happen and respect that. That's really important.
Mm.
It's a conversation that will be had, and would hope would come the other way.
Yeah.
Told those things, because
Yeah.
the last thing we would ever want to do is to upset anybody. So at this point, we've talked about verification. We talked about bringing into care, and now really the next step is certification. So that is the doctor that treated the person that has died in their last illness, and that can certify the cause of death. So they're going to be saying what this person died of, and they do that with a form called the medical certificate for cause of death. That is not the death certificate. It is a different form, and they send that to the registrar, because the registrar of births, marriage, and deaths has to register what a person has died of, and that's that sort of that bookend moment. So the same registrar that will register your birth will register your death, and that registrar will be in the district that the death occurred in as well. That's really important to know. So if someone's died away from home, it won't be your local registrar, but you can register at your local registrar. They will do a declaration to the registrar where it happened, because that's where death has to be registered. So there, we've now certified the death. The doctor's done that. They've sent the form off to the registrar. Then you're going to register the death, and that is how you get the death certificate. This is why I really, really wanted to talk about this today, because so much of it's so similar. So many of these words really overlap, and you say to people, right, how do I get, well, people ask me, how do I get the death certificate? Is that what the doctor does? And it's really important today to talk about that and explain how.
Yeah. And yeah, it is a bit confusing, the language sometimes, isn't it? And sometimes, you said earlier, Si, haven't you? And this is true, there's a bit of a delay. So if it's not a straightforward expected death, then you're going down the road. So, it could be somebody who seemed hale and hearty, and then just all of a sudden you just went. And this happened to my uncle, actually. He was a really healthy 80-odd-year-old chap, and he was, every Christmas he would go around delivering all his Christmas cards in person, because he didn't like to pay the postage. And he went round a certain friend's house and he delivered his Christmas card, and then he sat and had a whiskey with him like they always did. And he sat in his wingback chair, if you can imagine, by the fire of his friend's house, having this whiskey. And then he nodded off. And his friend thought, oh, he's having a little nap. And then an hour or two later thought, it's quite a long nap. and that's how my uncle died. Well, he'd have been made up with that.
There's worse ways to go than
He would have been happy with that, I'm absolutely sure. But of course, it was not expected. It was, and we had to wait as a family a little bit longer for our death certificate and our ability to arrange the funeral. So how does that happen then in that sort of situation?
So that's where certification comes in as a word and as an idea. So the doctor will certify death if they can provide a cause of death. If they can't, then the coroner's office, and from September, the medical examiners as well, are going to be getting involved in that process. The coroner's office, and this was a phrase I learned very, very early on, investigate deaths caused by accident or design.
Oh, right.
I love that phrase. I think it's brilliant. So it's a death that has happened unexpectedly. So something you're not expecting, or someone's caused it to happen. So the coroners at this point, they're going to be looking at why. They're going to get a medical history. They're going to see if actually this chap's had cancer for the last 6 years. As much as a doctor cannot attest to definitely that is why he died, because they haven't seen them for 4 weeks perhaps, the coroner is likely at that point to say, well, this is why they've died. If they can't, they're going to do what's called a post-mortem, an autopsy to those over the Atlantic, and that is a medical investigation as to why this person has died. They'll usually have a pretty good idea of what they're looking for before they start, so they're not as invasive as you can imagine from movies and things like that, because they're going to be going in with an idea of, right, what do we need to be testing for, what do we need to be looking for based on the medical history. And that means that the doctors aren't involved. So doctors aren't issuing that medical certificate for cause of death. The coroner is issuing another form, but they still issue it to the registrar. So there's still, somebody has to tell the registrar why the person is deceased. So that's then the coroner's job, and they do that. And then either way, you end up with the death being registered. And at that point, we're going to go on and we're going to arrange a funeral from there. So I think that's probably not far off where we need to draw a line for today, because that really tells you those first steps, what's going to happen, what the difference between verification, certification, medical certificate for cause of death, death certificate, all these things that overlap. And unfortunately, the language does make things confusing. Hopefully, I've made it a little bit more easy to understand.
No, that's really helpful. And in that waiting space where you're waiting for death certificates and you're waiting for things to go through, and you might be waiting for the coroner to come to some conclusions, your funeral director and sometimes even your celebrant are there to support you. So, don't feel, it can feel difficult, like you're treading water, but don't feel like you haven't got the support and people aren't on the end of the phone for you, because they absolutely will be. But yeah, that's a good moment to just pause, as they say, and we'll see you in the next episode, and we can sort of take it from there, I think, from once you've got your certification.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that's the next steps upon the next steps. And as Tina said, make sure you're using the people around you in that interceding period, because it's really important to know that you're not sitting on your hands and waiting. There are things you can be doing. And ultimately, your celebrant, your funeral director, they're there for you. So, thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you in the next one.
Yeah, see you in the next one. Bye for now.
Bye-bye. You've been listening to Good Goodbyes, the Funeral Facts podcast. Please do like, subscribe, comment, and share. Drop any questions on our social media, on Instagram, or in the text option in the show notes.
Si and I are qualified professionals, but we always advise our clients to seek any additional support from medical practitioners if they need to. And we hope you enjoyed this episode. Stay well and be kind to one another.